be live in the studio. Later on the programme, I'll speak live to Georgia's president about why she wants to stand up to Vladimir Putin and the quest for youth by the world's most powerful men. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Just how close is a ceasefire in Gaza? The United States and the United Kingdom insist a deal is within reach. Listen to Hamas or Israel, though, and the mood music is a lot less optimistic. Today, a Hamas spokesperson told me that Joe Biden's claim that a pause could hopefully be agreed by next week was, in his words, wishful thinking. The holy month of Ramadan is less than 2 weeks away. Everyone wants a truce before then. Because what could happen in the southern city of Rafah if Israel sends in ground forces is, well, unimaginable. An agreement would be in the interests of Benjamin Netanyahu, too. He's facing weekly protests to bring hostages home. He's been clear he wants to destroy Hamas. And Hamas, well, they want a comprehensive ceasefire and complete withdrawal of Israeli forces. So if neither side will compromise, who suffers? The people of Gaza, of course. The Israeli hostages still separated from their families. Let's get started with this report from our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, in Jerusalem.
In Gaza, they're looking for help from above. Airdrops are now one of the only ways to get aid into the north for the thousands who are stuck there. Today, along the water's edge, Palestinians scramble through the sand to reach some desperately needed food and medicine. Each parcel, successfully retrieved, is carefully cradled and taken back to waiting, hopeful families. A central part to any negotiated pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas will be the access for humanitarian aid into Gaza.
There is no flour, no gas, no wood for burning. I send my daughter in the morning to stand in the queue at the bakery to get a bundle of bread. Sometimes she comes home without anything, so the children don't have bread.
Both sides are under pressure to agree a deal. Protests inside Israel are growing every week, and Hamas is said to want a deal finalized before the holy month of Ramadan, less than 2 weeks away now. The US President Joe Biden has said that one could be close.
My hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
Israel and Hamas are both in their own wars of survival. Each side wants to see the complete destruction of the other, and so trying to find any kind of agreement between them is incredibly complicated, especially as Israel has overwhelming military momentum at the moment. But there is also reason for both sides to want a truce right now. And so as long as the negotiations are ongoing in Qatar, there is hope that the divisions can be narrowed.
Israeli soldiers have posed with their flag on top of a building in Khan Yunis. It seems to be a message of military defiance and victory. But what it just reveals is the complete destruction of Gaza's second largest city. If Israel plans to allow Palestinians to return home as part of a deal, then this is what they'll be returning to. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, in a moment, I'll be hearing from my panel, Conservative peer Baroness Wasi and the broadcaster Jonathan Sacerdotti. But first, is a ceasefire even possible? Well, tonight, I spoke with a spokesperson from Hamas. He reiterated the group's demand for the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops. He also refused to discuss the whereabouts of the group's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. Here's the interview.
Until now, officially, we didn't receive any formal proposals from the mediators after the current meetings in Paris.
So President Biden saying overnight that a ceasefire deal could be imminently reached. What's your reaction and response to that?
I think it is a wishful thinking, maybe because of internal political affairs in the United States, to release some of the tension around the Democratic parties in the year of the election. But practically, this statement has nothing to do with the reality. Until now, we didn't receive any formal proposals, and I think there are still gaps between what we are calling for, what we are demanding, and what is proposed from the other parties.
Let's talk about those gaps. Just tell us, what are the actual gaps that you're talking about from both sides?
It was clear for us from the day one, we are calling for stopping the aggression against our people. We are calling for a ceasefire. And through the negotiations with the mediator, we have talked about few red lines which we cannot avoid or cross. First of all, a total, comprehensive, declared ceasefire. Second, total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and the return of our people who has been displaced from the north to the south, that they are able to return back to their homes freely.
Dr. Naim, the Israelis say that the demands of Hamas are delusional. In your view, can there be any sort of deal without a complete ceasefire and truce, an end to the fighting, as far as you're concerned?
I think to ask for a total lasting ceasefire to stop this aggression and to allow our people to return to their houses where they have been displaced forcefully along the last 5 months, are not delusional. This is basis of being able to bring the Gaza Strip life back to before October 7th. Because
I mean, in your view, is that possible, given what happened after October 7? When you look at the situation in Gaza today, 30,000 people dead, 100,000 in total are either injured, missing or dead as a result of this conflict. Do you bear responsibility for what has happened?
No, at all, because we are people under occupation for 75 years. We in Gaza Strip and the West Bank occupied for 57 years after 67. We are in Gaza for 17 years under a suffocating siege, which has Gaza converted into a biggest open-air prison. We have given the international community
but today, Dr. Naim, the actions of October 7 have resulted in the reoccupation of Gaza, essentially, effectively. And civilians, Palestinian civilians, have been killed as a result of October the 7th.
Okay, but maybe you don't know. I don't know if you're aware or not, but you don't know that between 2000 and 2023, that 20,000 Palestinians killed by the Israelis.
And now we have 30,000 Palestinians killed in the space of 4 months.
Let me continue. Thousands of Palestinians died because of the suffocating siege on Gaza, because of malnutrition, lacking of medicine. Therefore, you are, as if you are asking me either to accept dying by malnutrition and lacking of medicine, or to accept dying by a rocket.
There is a lot of anger, growing anger inside Gaza towards Hamas. There are people who have told Sky News, Palestinian civilians who have said, the leadership are either in tunnels protected from the bombardment while civilians are dying, or they are outside of the country.
This is not true.
It is true. You're speaking outside of the country. You're not in Gaza. The leadership is based in Qatar. Sinwar is in a tunnel.
Sorry, do you want to ask me and I have to answer?
Yes, please go ahead. But when you say it's not true...
Or do you want to talk to yourself? If you want to talk to yourself, you can continue and can hear very, very politely. I have to have the chance to respond to your questions.
But when you say to me it's not true,
I left Gaza Strip.
You're speaking from outside the country.
Yes, I left Gaza Strip few days before October 7th for a meeting in Istanbul for a few days, and I have to return back. But my family, my children, my brothers, my sisters are there. 2 weeks ago, my mother, 3 of my nieces, 3 of my grandchildren was killed by the Israelis.
There's a lot of conversation about where the Hamas leadership are currently in Gaza. Do you know where they are? Are you in contact with them? And have they seen this proposal?
Most of our leadership are above the ground, operating most of our operations, social operation, other operations between the people, by the way, who are targeting the tanks.
Where is Yahya Sinwar? Where is Yahya Sinwar? The last image of him is on October 10 that the Israelis released inside
Why should I answer you? Why should I answer your question? He is in the right place.
You're saying that the leadership. You're saying they're not hiding in tunnels. You're saying they're out overground with the people driving the operations.
Yes, one of the leadership, we have the right to protect him. When today any rocket is launched towards Israel, you will find most of the leadership in bunkers, in tunnels, somewhere under the Kiryat in the middle of Tel Aviv, because this is the normal reaction of a leadership to be protected during a war. This is very, very simple. But at the same time, when it is feasible, most of our leadership, by the way, a lot of our political bureau has been killed during this attack. A lot of our members and cadres have been killed during this attack. Again, I should not present Yahya Sinwar in front of TVs to be attacked because of an interview with Sky News.
Is there regret, though, over what happened on October 7?
Sure not. Because we are reacting to our operation of 75 years. We are not willing. Look, we have given the international community 30 years after Oslo Agreement to reach a solution, an independent Palestinian state based on negotiations.
You, Hamas, released women and children from Gaza as part of the last hostage deal.
Okay.
If I can just...
You
so it wasn't a military operation if you're taking civilians into the Gaza Strip from Israel. Can I just ask you this final question?
That he's responsible for the aggression.
Do you believe there will be a deal before Ramadan?
We hope that we are able to reach a deal, because we have asked for a ceasefire from day one. But again, there is not enough pressure on the Israelis, neither from the Americans nor from the international community, to abide to the international resolutions, to the ICG resolutions, to stop firing, to stop the aggression, and to allow all the humanitarian aid to enter Gaza Strip. But if they allow Netanyahu to continue this aggression and to maybe to broaden this conflict beyond the Palestinian borders, this is the responsibility of the Americans, who are supporting blindly Netanyahu, and this is also the responsibility of the international community. But we are willing to reach a ceasefire as soon as possible.
Dr. Naim, thank you for your time. That was Dr. Bassem Naim, Hamas spokesperson, speaking to us a little earlier. Let's bring in our panellists now, Baroness Wasi and broadcaster Jonathan Sacher-Doty. Baroness Wasi, I'll come to you first. I mean, that was a 10, 15-minute conversation we had with the Hamas spokesperson. When you speak to Israeli officials, it also feels like neither side is willing to compromise or budge when it comes to this ceasefire.
I mean, there are two wars going on, aren't there? There's the actual war that's going on the ground where people are being killed, and then there's the war of words that's going on either side. But what's obvious to anybody on the ground is that there is huge opposition to Hamas in Gaza, and there is huge opposition to Netanyahu in Israel. I think there are people on both sides who've had enough and who want this to come to an end. And I sincerely hope that the Paris deal, which has now been communicated to Hamas, is something that both Netanyahu and the Hamas leadership can take on and realise that there has been enough killing. This has to come to an end, and this has to come to an end where we don't just stop the killing now, but we have some future prospect of peace to end the occupation and to bring forward two states.
Jonathan, I mean, you know, we saw Joe Biden just yesterday doing almost like ice cream foreign policy, holding that ice cream, talking about the situation in Gaza. You know, the severity and the seriousness of the situation didn't deserve that. And yet, you know, when we talk to Hamas or the Israeli side, they're at each other, and it's unclear how close they are to a deal.
Obviously, I think that negotiations for any kind of ceasefire or hostage release have to take place in secrecy and in private. So we don't know most of the details of what's going on. And when we hear things coming out which are leaked, we often need to assume that maybe they've been leaked deliberately as part of the negotiations. I will say that it's really strange to hear a Hamas representative speaking from Turkey, of all places. He's nowhere near the fighting. The others are in Qatar, far away from the fighting, living it up in fancy hotels. The people of Gaza are the ones who are suffering, and their leaders aren't serving them well. I think I would disagree a bit with what Saida said, that I don't think there is an equivalence between the people of Israel's feelings on what's going on and the people of Gaza's, because I think the people of Israel, when I've been out there reporting on it, are very clear that the aggression that took place on October the 7th was so brutal and extreme that it needs a response which will ensure that Israel has a level of security in the future. And that's why I think Benjamin Netanyahu...
So how is that different to the feelings of the people in Gaza?
Well, I think that the difference is that in saying that both sides have had enough of their leadership fighting, I think Israelis haven't had enough of their leadership continuing a war to keep them safe.
See, I disagree with you on that. I think if you look at the daily protests against Netanyahu, if you look at the protests and the accusations against Netanyahu,
the vast
that his
majority
son...
of the Israeli population want to continue the war until it's over. I mean, that's shown in almost all polling. And I think despite the divisions in Israel and despite Netanyahu's unpopularity over the last year or so, they've actually united very squarely behind the war.
Let me come back on this, Jonathan. So, three things. First of all, I think there is clear opposition to Netanyahu. It was there before the war. It's still there. And there are people on a daily basis protesting, particularly the hostages' family, who believe that Netanyahu and many of his ministers have not taken the issue of hostages seriously. And there have been clear comments from these ministers which show that actually hostages are not important. Secondly, there's been criticism of Netanyahu that his son is living it up, a bit like the Hamas leaders elsewhere, and isn't on the ground.
Well, his son isn't an elected official.
Doing his bit.
We don't look at the son of the Prime Minister and criticise him in this country.
Doing his bit in the way that lots of young Israelis are doing. And thirdly, some of the strongest voices that are coming out of Israel are the voices of those communities that were attacked so brutally at the beginning of October, who are saying, do not weaponise our grief and do not go in and kill more people.
I don't know which survivors you've been talking to, because
ones.
I've interviewed lots of survivors from the kibbutzim who are adamant that despite the lives they lived, for this man that you interviewed, he used to be the Minister of Health under the Hamas government, so he will be entirely familiar with the volunteers from the kibbutzim who used to drive Palestinians from Gaza to Israeli hospitals for treatment. Yahya Sinwar had a brain cancer operation in Israel. These people have benefited under his time as Minister of Health from Israeli healthcare.
You know, you talk about the hostage families. Well, what about the hostage families who are protesting, who are storming the Knesset, who are demanding that more be done to get their family members home?
Undoubtedly, if any of us were in their position, I'm sure we too would want anything done to release the hostages. And there are, incidentally, hostage families who aren't protesting. They're quiet because they have faith in the government. Whether the government is doing enough...
But then the faith in the government is also being questioned by Israel's staunchest allies. The United States, the UK are saying the level of killing...
I think what we need, really... So, effectively, I think the problem here is that if we criticise a democratic country that is trying to deal with a security threat, which was so massive, what happened on October the 7th happened, we need to have a better solution. And I don't think anyone is suggesting one, whether it's the unelected Lord Cameron, our Foreign Secretary, or whether it's Joe Biden. There is nobody saying exactly what would remove this threat from Israel's border. It's on the doorstep.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is if Netanyahu is the best option for Israel, honestly, my heart weeps for Israelis. There has to be
any Prime Minister in Israel would be conducting this war now.
Sorry, go ahead. You've got to let me speak.
Sorry,
I don't like interrupting. I don't like being interrupted. Basically, there has to be a better option. There are thousands that took to the streets in Israel.
What is it? What is the better option?
Sorry, just,
Jonathan, you've got to let me speak. I don't operate like this. I don't interrupt. I don't like being interrupted. So, Jonathan, there were thousands that took to the streets who basically said, before even this war started, that Netanyahu was wrong for Israel. There were people who stood outside Downing Street when he last came to the United Kingdom saying this man is bad for Israel. He's bad for Israelis. He's definitely bad for Palestinians. And I think the quicker people who consider themselves to be friends of Israel realise that they do not have to be friends of Netanyahu, because Netanyahu is not a friend of Israel, the better it will be for the future of a secure Israeli state.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu was elected as their Prime Minister. He was very unpopular before the war broke out. I think that despite the protests that were going on for months about judicial reform in Israel, actually the country swung quite squarely behind him and the war effort. And I do think that virtually any Prime Minister of Israel at this moment would be conducting a pretty similar war, and that's why there's been... Well, there aren't clear voices within Israel, in Israeli politics, who are contradicting the idea of continuing the war in order to eliminate the Hamas threat. And while there is still battalions of Hamas left, then there's bound to be a pretty unified opinion in Israel. Of course, the hostages complicate it, because the hostages are the Israeli civilians who were kidnapped, the ones that were raped, beheaded, live streamed on the internet for their families to have to go through the horror of watching. Those people, well, let's say the hostage families are the lucky ones, because theirs are perhaps still alive in Gaza. I think that all of those people, understandably, want the hostages returned, and there are people who are critical of Netanyahu not doing enough. The war is entirely supported.
I've just got to say, look, war is not the answer. There were two objectives that Israel had at the beginning of this, before 30,000 people were killed. One was the return of the hostages, and the second was to eliminate Hamas. Neither of those objections have been satisfied, and they have killed 30,000 people are now dead. We have to stop this. We cannot carry on. Those military objections of Israel are not being met, and there is too much human suffering. And I sincerely hope that people like you and others will be encouraging people within Israel to say we have to have a deal, and all of us will be saying on all parties saying we have to have a deal. We have to bring this to an end.
Baroness Wasi, Jonathan, we'll move on to the next segment, but we will have you back later on in the programme. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, on the front line of a drugs war. We follow Ecuador's police out on patrol as they track down gang members bringing violence and chaos to the streets.
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. We're taking you on the front line of Ecuador's fight against drugs gangs. The cocaine trade is fueling violence across the country, and right now, Ecuador is in a state of emergency. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsay, and his team joined police and special forces trying to track down gang members. From Guayaquil, they sent this report.
Police sweep through neighbourhoods where drug gangs have ruled with impunity. Ecuador's never seen anything like this. The police never came here before. Not anymore. The drug gangs have been recategorised as terrorists, so the security forces have pretty much carte blanche to do what they like. They swarm into apartment blocks, forcing their way inside. For some, it is clearly terrifying. A man and his children cower on the floor as officers storm in, telling them to stay where they are. They've done nothing wrong. Indeed, nobody was arrested in this sweep.
The police are going house to house, door to door, going into apartments, but people are very unhappy about what they see, obviously, an invasion of their privacy. But the police say they're going to look for drugs and they're going to look for gang members wherever they want to. To say people outside are unhappy and then people here are unhappy too.
Outside, young men are held with their hands above their heads while they're searched and questioned. Their families start objecting. It's tense, and the police are uncompromising.
We all have mothers. They're my children. They have family, all of them. We're not into bad things. No one here is. We're all good, hardworking people. All of us here work. We're good people. There's nothing here.
The commanding officer is absolutely resolute in his belief that these operations are bringing about change. Local objections, just part of the process to stamp out gang power.
Obviously they are upset because police couldn't come here before and they could do as they pleased. There was no control. It was all indecency in that sector. We now control this territory and there is respect. So, no matter how much they hate our police work, we're now in control, and that's a fundamental part of us winning this war.
These anti-terror operations are virtually continuous, day and night. Everyone gets caught up in this, and it's frightening. But Ecuador is in many ways fighting for its future. The country is being used as an international transit hub for cocaine by Mexican drug cartels. The gang's influence has spread throughout society, and there is a feeling here that if the authorities don't take back control of Ecuador, it will become a failed narco-state.
This operation is called Plan Phoenix. It's an $800 million exercise in trying to bring law and order to the streets of this country. Reason why there are so many migrants making their way north towards the United States from countries like this is because the gangs control these areas and terrorize people. So people have enough of the gangs and leave. Sort of operations like this, with the support of the United States, are to try to make life more normal here so that people stay. They're all linked.
Through dimly lit streets, a convoy of military trucks and pickups wind their way through another barrio in Guayaquil, Ecuador's second city and drug smuggling capital. They fan out, banging on doors. They're after gang members, drugs and weapons. It looks like a war zone, and in many ways it now is. The government has declared war on the gangs and their drug cartel controllers. The soldiers are led by Secret Service officers who have specific intelligence from informants.
Seems that somebody's been arrested with weapons. Just trying to locate where they are.
We catch them up. They say a gang member has been caught and is held while soldiers search his home. A bag of cocaine beside him. Gang members are often paid by the cartels with small bags of the drug, which they sell on to make hard cash. A woman, we believe is his partner, clearly upset, comes out with 2 children and calls to a neighbour to take them in. Soldiers say another gang member escaped.
The gangs make it complicated because they have people who tip them off as we approach these areas that are hard to access.
The suspect is taken away and put in the back of a truck with another man. He's trussed up and put face down. Their treatment is hardcore. It's designed to be. They're sending a message to the gangs that things have to change here. But Ecuador is taking on the world's most powerful drug cartels. And the cartels rarely lose, especially when demand for their drugs in the USA, Europe and Britain remains so high.
And Stuart joins me here in the studio. Stuart, fantastic reporting, as always. I mean, this is a country now fighting for its future.
I think it very much is. It certainly sees it that way. The influence of the gangs had just got so much that the president said enough's enough. He's designated them as terrorists, which gives the police and the army pretty much unlimited powers to apprehend and to even engage, fight with them if they need to, and to lock them up, which they are doing in large numbers. And I think they see this as a crossroads for the country, from which, if they don't sort out the gangs now, they will become a failed state. They will follow the path of Mexico, which isn't a failed state, but interestingly, it has this. It's in the top 10 economies in the world, and yet its black economy, the drug economy, is about 10 times bigger than Mexico's proper economy, and so they don't want that to happen. But it's a really tough fight.
And you would know that. I mean, the number of countries on the continent that you have covered and reported on that have become proper narco-states where the cartels control, namely Mexico, as you say, does it feel like this is on the edge here, that it could become that?
It definitely could become that. Another country that had slipped into that was El Salvador. Now, in a way, they've been a beacon by which Ecuador can follow, because they're locking people up constantly. Crime has dramatically dropped up. As much as 2% of the population is behind bars, which is actually staggering to believe. But it is working, and the president there is becoming popular. This president is going to become popular too, because although the gangs have their claws into society, the reason is that there aren't any alternatives. There's not much employment in the barrios. They don't trust the police. The army are very much leading the way in this fight against the terror gangs. But if you can convince those people that there will be work and the gangs won't have that influence, and that they don't need to be doing the jobs for the gangs and for the cartels, then people will stay in the country. And this is something that's really important, right? This is it. The United States has become a huge political topic, the sheer volume of people trying to cross from Central and South America into the United States. And countries like Ecuador is a classic example, so is Honduras, so is Nicaragua, so is El Salvador, of people who've left because the gangs are making life impossible in the barrios unless you work for them. If you can stabilise that, which is why the United States is giving $200 million to assist in this operation. If you can stabilise it, then people don't need to leave and go and find life, a safer life elsewhere. Because it's not just about migration for economics. It's actually about wanting to be alive, because many of them know if they stay, the gangs will kill them.
Yeah, as you say, that's the point I was trying to pick up on. The safety aspect, it's not just about employment, it's staying alive. And it's in the United States' interest to ensure they stay in their country.
Yeah, they have two interests here. One is to stop the migration of people from Central and South America, but also, if they can break down the gangs' working practices, to stop drugs going to North America, which they do from Ecuador, which is a sort of transit point, because it goes straight into the Pacific and right up and gets into Central and then North America very, very quickly and quite easily. If they can stop that, they stop drugs coming in as well. Now, one thing to remember in all of this, and the reason why the cartels, and I'll explain in a moment why this is important for Ecuador, but because the cartels are so successful, is because demand from countries like the United States, from Britain, which is now per capita the second biggest user of cocaine in the world, and then Northern Europe. People don't realise that whatever they do on a Saturday night in some county town in the UK, it leads to people in the barrios losing their lives and being caught up in dreadful life to feed that habit. The cartels know that demand is so high, so they will do everything to try to keep this supply system in place, and that's the problem that the president faces.
Exceptional reporting. It is part of a three-part series, and we will see you in prisons in Ecuador tomorrow. So we look forward to that important report as well. Thank you so much, Stuart. Next up, standing up to Russia. I'll be speaking live to Georgia's president about her aspirations to join the EU. Welcome back. In a moment, I'm going to be joined live by the President of Georgia. But first, I want to bring you up to speed with its complex history, its leaders' aspirations to join the EU, and its relationship with Russia. Have a look.
A country finding itself at a crossroads. years of instability, overshadowed by its relationship with Russia. It has aspirations to join the European Union, but has also been cultivating a stronger relationship with Moscow. So where is Georgia, and why could what happens next there be so important? The small country sits on the intersections of Europe and Asia. It borders Turkey on its west side, Azerbaijan to the southeast, and crucially, Russia to the north. For nearly 70 years, Georgia sat under Russia's control. Protests in the streets, massive demonstrations in the capital, and finally, independence regained in 1991. Instability followed. In 2003, they called it the Rose Revolution, a non-violent storming of the government accused of corruption, led by young politician Mikhail Saakashvili.
It's the greatest day in the history of this nation. Not a shot was fired.
Then, 5 years later, in 2008, Russian forces began an invasion of Georgia. It marked the start of Europe's first 21st century war. The conflict itself was over in days, but its impact persists. Moscow's ambitions hang over the region. It's effectively maintained control over 20% of Georgia's territory since the invasion. So where could Georgia go next? The country was run by US-educated lawyer Saakashvili until 2012, celebrated as a hero in the West. But later jailed on abuse of power charges. Last year, the politician reappeared, gaunt and unwell. Supporters say he's been poisoned, but he's also been on hunger strikes. And now a president looking to the West, a prominent voice in the country's politics. Many hope Georgia could join the European Union.
It's essential for Georgia to get established within Europe while the Western nations admit Georgia into their family.
On the other hand, there's many in government who want to move even closer to Russia. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, some see the grip on Georgia tightening. For now, whichever way Georgia turns will have implications far beyond its borders.
Well, joining me now is the President of Georgia, Salome Zourabichvili. Thank you so much, President, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, your country, we just did a piece there about the background and history of your country, most recent history. Your country understands all too well what it means to be invaded by Russia. In fact, it's happened 3 times.
It's happened 3 times, yes. Thank you very much for having me tonight. You're very right in saying that we are firsthand looking at what happens when you're living next to an empire that doesn't seem to be imperialistic.
What sort of advice then have you been giving and do you give to Ukraine, for example? Because you're still grappling with it. Your government is very much feeling the pressure and Russia's grip tightening. And at the same time, I'm sure you're having conversations with your counterparts in Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have to give any advice to the Ukrainians because we have had an almost parallel history. 19th century imperial Russia, 20th century Soviet Russia. We have lived all of that together. We've had the invasions. And so we are on the same path towards knowing that our only perspective is to get closer and closer to the European Union. And that's the path that we've been following together with Ukraine. We have been countries, the first associated, the trio, together with Moldova. And then the war in Ukraine has accelerated this path, in fact. Bringing our countries to the candidate status.
You're saying that, President, but there was an attempt to impeach you because of how close you've been with Europe.
Yes, but I was not impeached. That was not a success. And the real decision that was taken last year was allowing Georgia to grant the candidate status. And that's a major decision, which has really got us firmly on the side where we should be going, where Georgia, in fact, has been going all its history.
Are you concerned, though, about the fact that Russia still has so much of a sway over your country?
Of course, I think that everybody should be concerned, and not only us. We are concerned because we are directly there. We have 20% of our territory that is currently occupied by Russia. And we are concerned because we are going to have very important elections by October. And we know the experience of many other countries, much stronger than we are, how Russia can interfere with election, how Russia can wage hybrid warfare on countries, and we are directly experiencing that. Cyber attacks, economic pressure can be used, all kinds of propaganda, financing some marginal groups, because in Georgia, really, pro-Russian groups are very marginal, because we have occupied territories and we have the memory of these
and occupied
invasions.
territories, you've never been, I mean, as you say, they remain occupied.
They remain occupied. So for a population like that, to have pro-Russian groups and parties is quite difficult to imagine. But there are pro-Russian that do not declare themselves, and there is financing that is coming in to support those groups and to support some forms of anti-Western propaganda. What we're seeing elsewhere, we're seeing here, and we're going to see more of that, I'm sure, this year. So we have to be very cautious.
President, I'm just going to bring your attention to another story that we've been following and we've looked into. As you know, your country has a history of children who have been stolen, up to 100,000 babies that were stolen between the 1950s and the early 2000s. We just want to show our viewers these images. It's of 19-year-old Anna and Lisa. They were twins that were separated at birth. They were sold to different families in the black market in 2005. They've now been reunited. We also have other material, other footage of Makvala and her son David. This is the first time that they have been reunited after she was told the baby she'd given birth to was dead. In fact, he was sold. We know that your government has been investigating these cases, but what justice has been given to these families? What sort of compensation, if any?
I don't know that any compensation has been given. In fact, it has been started by non-governmental activists and organizations that have started this process of uncovering what had been happening years ago. And that is something that has really struck the whole Georgian population, but I don't know about any formal compensation that has been given yet, at least.
Okay. President Zourabichvili, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, Biden's charm offensive. What was to gain when the US president sat on the sofa for a late-night American talk show?
And tonight on Sky News at 10, our first of 3 special reports from Ecuador and the attempts to crack down on notorious drugs gangs. The post office inquiry descends into chaos as top executives blame each other and the victims of the scandal continue to wait for compensation. We'll be live too in Kyiv as NATO countries are forced to confirm they will not be sending troops to Ukraine. That's coming up at 10 o'clock.
What we're doing right now is we are going out to some of the remotest parts of the Svalbard archipelago where polar bear mums are in their den still tucked in with their still growing cubs. And we're setting up remote camera systems. We're setting up both high definition video systems and then simpler trail cam systems. And we're trying to get information on when polar bears come out of their dens, what they do when they're there, and what condition they're in. When polar bears are born, sometime around the first of the year, they're about the size of a human fist or a stick of butter, is another way to look at it. They are blind and hairless. They need that protection of the den, and they need their mother's really fat, rich milk so they can grow quickly and get to the point where here pretty soon, within the next couple of weeks, they'll start to emerge from their dens. And that mom is going to make her way back down to the sea ice where she can eat. Here in Svalbard, we've seen average winter temperatures increase as much as 7 degrees C, and that is dramatic. In places I've spent most of my career, I've seen sea ice go from being close to shore, where I could see it within a few miles in a given year, to now that same place, that same ice is 400 to 500 miles offshore. You're talking about dramatic change, dramatic habitat loss across the Arctic. One of the most important parts of a polar bear's life is that maternal denning period. It's that critical time when these young cubs are at their most vulnerable. So we need to learn as much about what they require from us in terms of a lack of disturbance, in terms of the habitat that they need to be successful there. If we don't have cubs coming into the population, we're not going to have polar bears around very long. So we really need to protect the mums and cubs. Every morning here from on out, we get up pretty early, check the weather, and if it's a go, which today is a classic day of maybe, we will load up with the search and rescue helicopter team here, and we will head out to a den site to deploy cameras. It's an all-day operation. When we get back, we have to get the gear set up for the next day's deployment. And I should mention, we wouldn't be here at all without our partners at Norwegian Polar Institute and our partners at San Diego Zoo, who work closely with us on this project.
Welcome back. What do you do when your declining age is becoming one of the big issues on the campaign trail? Well, you go on a late-night talk show to poke fun at yourself and showcase your mental agility. I'm talking about Joe Biden, of course, who made a surprise appearance on Late Night with Seth Meyers. It got me thinking about other moments when leaders have tried to prove they've still got it. Have a look.
You got to take a look at the other guy. He's about as old as I am, but he can't remember his wife's name.
Yeah.
And,
I am a young, vibrant man.
by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend.
An anonymous, really an anonymous.
Currently 81 years old.
Who the hell told you that?
Yeah.
That's classified.
That's classified.
Here in the studio is Baroness Wasi and Jonathan Sechidotti to discuss this further. I don't know who to come to. Jonathan is
have his hands on his
face. You go ahead.
Men. What is it? I mean, you wouldn't have women doing that, would you? But I mean, look, I'm in the House of Lords where the average age is 71. And so I see some of the most phenomenal brains in the House of Lords. And if I ever had to choose between debate in the House of Commons and debate in the House of Lords, the age is there in the House of Lords, but the quality of debate is there in the House of Lords. If you look at somebody like Baroness Butler-Sloss, I think she's 90 now. And, you know, recently when I heard her speak on the Rwanda debate, she blew my mind. You know, I mean, the level of intellect and coherence and strength in the way that she was speaking and the amount of experience that she brought to the table. So I think age is, you know, it's just a number, isn't it? At the end of the day, you could be 50 or 60 and not be up to leadership, and you could be 80 or 90 and still be capable of it.
I just want to say, do you remember the Free Britney movement? I want Free Joe. It's cruelty. This is elder abuse. Let the man go. Let him go out quietly. He looked at that ice cream. He forgot who President Sisi was. He said they'd open the gates to Mexico to let the Palestinians out. The guy doesn't know where he is. I can't believe that the leader of the free world looks like that. It's painful and it's bad for all of us. And the Democrats must be able to offer something better than what we just saw there. That's utterly depressing.
Jonathan, Baroness Warsi, great to chat to you both tonight. Thank you so much. Well, that's all for tonight's programme. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. News at 10 is next. Good night.